You're watching Your Money Matters here at NDTV Profit. I'm Mahima Vajrajani. Now, we've been tracking this story throughout the day, the new labor code. The union government has formally merged 29 labor laws into 4 broad codes. Now, in effect from 21st of November, under the new framework, all employees are entitled to a statutory minimum wage supported by a national floor wage. For the first time, gig and platform workers come under social security benefits. Now, to take this conversation ahead, to understand as to what this means for Aam Aadmi and what does this legally mean, we are joined by Udayan Adhyay, who's the founder of Uday on Money, joining us now, and we're also joined by Vinay Joy, who's a partner at Khaitan and Company, joining us now. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen, and thank you so much for taking out the time. My first question to you is, Udayan, in simple terms, what do these 4 labor codes mean for an average Indian worker who's a part of this force? What does this mean for him or her?
Thank you so much, Mahima. Good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Vinay, good to see you. And look, these changes were long coming, right? They've been in the works for multiple years. Anyone involved knows that India needed a labor labor code reform, and this is just a part of that. There are 2 aspects to this. One is a more macro perspective as to how it affects the country, how it changes things there. But there's also one very critical aspect, right? How it affects the common man, how it affects our payslips, how it affects how much money we actually get. And there has been some confusion, there has been some concern around this, because one of the key changes in this labor code revision, consolidating those 29 labor laws into 4, has been how wages has been defined and certain points with respect to how it's calculated when it comes to your total pay. So earlier, if you looked at any salary slip, you would notice that wages, which is the basic salary, dearness allowance, retaining allowance, that would be about anywhere between 30 to 40, very rarely above that, right, of the total pay of someone's salary slip. Now, as per this new change, it has to be 50% of your total pay. Now, this may seem like a small footnote, but what it actually does is that a lot of factors when it comes to your salary slip get affected because of it. So firstly is Provident Fund, right? Because remember, Provident Fund is a percentage of your basic salary plus DA. Now, if the basic salary goes up, then the Provident Fund contribution technically should also go up, right? So if someone's salary slip is accounting for 12% of basic salary as the Provident Fund contribution, then their enhanced salary does take a hit. But at the same time, there are a lot of employees, a lot of employers even, who cap Provident Fund contributions, no matter what someone's salary is, at 1,800 rupees per month. So if you are in the second camp, where it's capped at 1,800 per month, then the effect of your, then the impact on your in-hand income is minimal. Some back-end calculations tell me that for a 20 lakh total compensation per year, it reduces your in-hand salary by anywhere between 600 to 1,000 rupees per month. But at the same time, if your EPF contribution is significantly more, is 12%, plus let's say you are also contributing through NPS, employers corporate NPS contribution, then all of that is linked to your basic salary. So then your salary can go down. So really study your salary slip, go to your HR, and have an honest conversation with them, right? Like next month, what exactly happens, because it really changes from salary slip to salary slip.
Right, absolutely. And I think that gives, a perspective to everybody who's, not probably taken a deep dive into where their salary slip stands. I think this is the time when one should go back and take a look at the constituents that are there in the salary slip. My question, I mean, this was, everybody's question in the newsroom as well as to why now. I mean, were these changes actually needed now? Do you think there is a problem with the old system that is there, which is being resolved with this new 4 codes that they've come out with?
Okay. Thanks, Mahima. Firstly, like Udayan said, this has been pending for a really long time now. I think the question that we've been asking is why so suddenly, so on such an immediate war footing, the government has sort of looked to enforce these codes. In terms of your larger question, I think the labor laws were due a reform for quite some time. A lot of these are industrial age laws that still tend to apply to our establishments, though we have moved far away from a lot of what the content of these laws sort of initially looked to sort of cover. We have sort of moved much beyond that. A lot of these laws did not really look to cover the services sector as a whole, and we were sort of looking to sort of make them apply there. Now that still continues. I do say that the change in wages as a definition is an important one, because we had across these 29 laws, at least 20 of them would have had different definitions of wages. And I think that used to lead to a lot of administrative work in terms of being computing wages under each specific legislation separately. And that often leads to a lot of confusion generally. So this measure of sort of unifying that definition, bring about uniformity, and that's a larger theme that runs across the codes, is certainly beneficial and required. Now, for a lot of it, if you ask me, the codes still retain a lot of what was there in the earlier laws. So I would say at least 70% to 75% of the content of the new codes is quite similar to what was there earlier. So it's not the massive change that was being sort of touted, at least. But that said, the remaining 25%, there are new initiatives, there are changes to the existing framework, and those are all important changes to sort of bring us on track to hopefully make further reforms to make it more employer and employer friendly going forward.
And one of those key aspects is appointment letters now being made mandatory, right? So then I wanted to understand as to how important this is, one thing, in terms of job security, because we've seen that, informally we've seen earlier people being hired without an appointment letter, then being sacked as well, right? So how important is this change?
This is, one of those things where you just assume that you would get an appointment letter when you get hired somewhere, but that not being true, that just speaks volumes as to what kind of labor laws, employee empowerment was present. I think this is a huge move for a lot of people who weren't, say, in the top 0.1, top 0.5%, top 1% of India. Because this appointment letter makes it easier to get other financing services, right? Whether it's loans, whether it's applying for credit cards, and a bunch of other things like that. So absolutely, I think the simplifying things, this should have been present earlier. They've implemented it now.
Okay, understood. I think the biggest headline, and the other biggest headline is social security, right? For a lot of these gig workers, platform workers, how important do you think this is? And how does this actually look on ground right now?
So the rule states that 1 to 2% of turnover
Correct.
for gig platforms should now be reserved for social security of the gig workers. The gig platforms have actually welcomed this move. I think it's a great move, right? Because these are people who are depending on the platforms to pay them. They're devoting their entire day, their entire month, their entire year to these platforms working for them. So actually knowing that, okay, there is some light at the end of that tunnel in terms of social security, right? Because until now it wasn't present from a legal perspective. So I think that's huge. Talking about social security as well, one major change is how gratuity is now calculated, the impact of it. So because again, the basic salary, the wages component increases, gratuity payments also go up. So just like I mentioned earlier, that you would have slightly lesser in hand money even if your PF contribution is capped at 1,800 per month. With the same 20 lakh example, you're essentially now potentially going to have 1 lakh higher in gratuity payment if you serve out your 5 years at a company. And this also ties in, I think, to a larger picture that I have noticed the government sort of tackle. I don't know if this was meant for it, but we are a young country right now, but we won't stay young forever, right? 20, 25, 30 years later, looking after people, looking after retirement benefits is going to be something that if the government doesn't do right now, it's going to pay the bill at that point in time. So I think this also ties into those larger measures as well, with NPS changes and other things like that.
Interesting. So Vinay, I mean, because you would know the fine print in a better way, just want to understand that, does this mean that for gig workers or platform workers from here on, everything that is PF, gratuity, your ESIC, insurance, etc., will have to be provided?
So yes, Mahima, actually the rules are meant to sort of provide for that. Now, what the code says is it sort of distinguishes requirements for what the central government shall frame and what individual state governments are required to frame. So central governments might look to cover, say, life and disability cover, health and maternity benefits, etc. Whereas state governments, on the other hand, will cover for provident fund, if they get injured on the jobs and, some benefits for that, some, skill upgradation and all of that. So different sort of schemes provided for gig workers under both the central government schemes and state schemes. And that is something a couple of states, I think Rajasthan and Karnataka, have already looked to roll out certain rules or certain under for gig workers in their respective states. And once these get notified, the workers in these particular states will at least start getting those benefits. I think, of course, there will be some confusion, and I think what will take time is the gig economy is such that today I can be a worker not only for, say, I can be delivering for Swiggy, I can also be delivering for Zomato, I can be delivering for other service providers as well. And so how I get registered and tagged and who bears my responsibility or liability for making those payments, I think that is something that we'll have to sort of see.
Interesting, for sure, and this is probably a loophole that one needs to take a look at as well. But minimum wage for all workers, Vinay, this is also one thing that was there, and which I wanted to understand as to how will this impact in terms of different sectors where we've always seen exploitation take place, where we've always seen that low wages have been continuously being paid. Do you think that this now will be more regulated from here on?
So, Mahima, again, to be frank, we have always had minimum wages provided with employments. Now, I think what you say is absolutely correct. I think the enforcement of what, how it gets implemented, I think that's an important consideration. Now, if you ask me what is the major change, there is going to be a national floor wage, which is going to be set. Basically, that no worker employed across, say, the country will be paid wages below a certain threshold. Now, above and beyond that, states can, modify those limits, can prescribe their own minimum wage limits for each scheduled employment, and which is already what is happening today. So I think while it is obviously a positive move to try and provide for that minimum floor, but obviously I would assume that the minimum floor wage which is prescribed would be at a low threshold, primarily because you would not typically expect a worker sitting in Mumbai earning the same as a worker, say, working out of Sholapur. And because of, regional disparities in how pay works, the national floor will need to be something which is feasible across all states. And above and beyond that, states will be able to enact their own minimum wage thresholds. So I think it is positive in the sense of the moment a minimum floor gets set, at least in that state, everyone sort of has to get above and beyond. And maybe at least in other parts of India, not maybe the metro cities or the large cities, maybe in smaller areas, yes, it will certainly get employers to start paying their employees more. And hopefully it is enforced in that fashion as well.
So, so then, Vinay, the other aspect is that you're supposed to get your salary by at least 7th of every month. Do you think this will be legally enforceable as well?
So again, I think, see, we have always had a lot of these laws. I can again tell you just as an example. One of the things which got a lot of feedback in the press was this requirement that within 2 days of an employee's employment coming to an end, their full and final settlement pay needs to be paid out to them. Now, this is again not a new step. It's already provided for under certain Shops and Establishments Acts. It's just that because it's being enacted now, a lot of people have picked up upon that. So we are really hoping that there will be a lot more enforcement of this. So we have had a lot of these laws in place already. It's about how enforcement would work. So yes, if someone doesn't get paid by the 7th of a month, their salary, they can certainly look to approach and get a remedy for that. So they can certainly look to enforce that, right? Hopefully they will not need to, because there will be better mechanisms to ensure that that happens.
Okay. Vinay, from my understanding, a lot of states still have not notified rules in terms of how this will take place. So just want to understand as to how this transition will take place and how early do you think a common man will be able to get the benefit out of this?
Yeah, that's actually a great question, Mahima, because I think there is currently a lot of confusion around when it exactly gets notified, particularly given that there are no state rules in effect just as of now. Now, under a lot of these codes, a number of states had put out their draft rules in the public domain. But now that these laws have been notified, we would expect that these would again be put out and then finalized. So we are looking at a minimum window, I would say, of between 45 to 90 days at the very minimum before these rules get notified in a number of the states which have already enacted them. Now, there are certain states, I think West Bengal has been behind the curve, for example, in terms of formulating these rules in the first instance. And it is going to be a slightly ambiguous situation with respect to how that would get enforced there. Now, the government, in its notification where it sort of notified these laws, has made it clear that in the absence during this transition period, we are going to have existing state laws, state rules continue to apply. And that is how this will sort of get implemented. The fact is, given that the 4 codes have now been enforced, technically they have repealed all the old acts. So the acts stand repealed, but per the provisions of the General Clauses Act, your state rules continue to be enforced, and those will sort of continue to remain until they get replaced by the newer state rules.
Okay, so then there is, I mean, long way to go right now. Dilli abhi dur hai for sure. I mean, we'll have to wait and watch out for as to how this gets implemented in terms of phases as well. But Udayan and Vinay, thank you so much. I think this will help our viewers understand as to what this is and what this means for them. So thank you so much for taking out the time and helping us understand the new Labour Code.
Thanks, Mahima.